Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well. And let's take a little bit of time here to explore one other aspect of the upcoming season for the Seattle Seahawks. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this year because it's not that important. It's not that big of a deal. And I don't want to spend too much time on something that's not going to move the needle by that much. But this is worth discussing for at least a little bit so we all understand exactly where we are with regards to next year's draft. So, the 2024 draft, you take a look at NFL mock draft database here, you can see that the Seahawks currently have a full allotment of draft picks. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, plus an extra third rounder. So they have another team's third round pick. If we were to generate some compensatory picks uh, next offseason, they would not apply to this draft, I don't believe. So I don't think that's in play. I believe these are the picks that we have to work with, and there's not a whole lot that can change that. So we've got these 8 picks, and the interesting one here is, of course, the extra third rounder. So all these other picks speak for themselves. There are native picks. Their placement will be determined by our performance this year. But there's this extra third round pick, and I want to go into exactly what is going on with this pick before the season starts, so we can not spend a ton of time on it because it's really not that big of a deal. A third round pick, where a third round pick falls in the third round, is very, very minor compared to the same for a first rounder, and it's a lot less significant than a second rounder. So a third round pick could be at the very top of the third or the bottom of the third. Obviously, there's some difference, and it's obviously more impactful than where the day 3 picks slot in, but it's not worth following the way we may have followed our picks last year, because last year we had both top 2 Denver picks. How Denver did last year was extremely important to determining the value of our draft, and they did really badly, and our draft was great in value because of it. So this year, the best our pick could be is 65, and the worst our pick could be, I guess, would be 96, right? And there is a difference between 65 and 96. I'm not going to pretend otherwise, but it's definitely not the same as the difference between like 5 and 13 or 6 and 21. So this is not big. But I want to talk about exactly what this pick could do. So you go over to this article on The Athletic. They kind of lay out exactly how this trade works. So for those of you who may not remember, Seattle had the 83rd pick in the third round last year. The 83rd, or excuse me, this year, 83rd pick in the most recent draft. We traded it to the Denver Broncos, and we moved back 25 spots. We moved back to the top of the fourth round, number 108, right near the top of the fourth. So the way Denver compensated us for moving back 25 spots from the third to the fourth was they gave us their 2024 third round pick. So that was our compensation for that trade, and that is where our extra third round pick comes from. Now, here's the important part of the language being used with this trade. Denver has a native third and a third from the Saints because they got a third in the Sean Payton trade. We are going to receive the lower of the 2 picks. And by lower, it means of less value. So you have 2 teams, the Broncos and the Saints, that are involved here. If the Broncos have the worst record in the league and the Saints win the Super Bowl, we're taking the Saints' third round pick. If the Broncos win the Super Bowl and the Saints have the worst record in the league, we're getting the Broncos pick. So if one of those teams is good, we're getting the pick of the team that is good. That's basically the best way to put it. So understand going into this season that if you are going to follow closely the Saints and the Broncos to see how they do and how it affects our third round pick this upcoming year, you need both to be bad for the pick to be high in the third. It's not good enough for just one of the teams to be bad. It's not good enough for just the Broncos to be bad. You're going to need both. So that makes it less likely the pick is going to be really high in the third. And you combine that with the fact that the impact of a high third versus a low third just isn't really that big. It's not worth following all that closely. Maybe we'll talk about it every now and then in stream. Maybe I'll mention it every now and then in video, but it's not going to be like last year. Last year, especially at the end of the season, I started making videos every week just talking about where the pick was, where the pick looked like it was going to be, where things were going with it. And those videos were actually very, very popular. A lot of people clicked on them because in some ways it was just as interesting as the season the Seahawks were actually having. That's not going to be the case this year. It's a third round pick. It doesn't really appreciate or depreciate that much in value based on ranking. And if you don't believe that, go look at the trade value charts for draft picks. Using any model you want to. The modern model, the Jimmy Johnson model, the calculator model, whatever you want to use. Go look at the difference between the top pick in the first and the last pick in the first, and then go look at the difference between the top pick in the third and the last pick in the third. It's night and day. So it's good to know exactly what can affect the pick. And of course, to those of us out there who really obsessively follow this stuff, we hope the pick is better. But it's kind of threading the needle this year because we're needing two teams to be bad for the pick to be high in the third. So what I can say is that Denver is off to a very bad start this season. They've had a defensive lineman, Uzurike, who was actually the other guy they got in the Wilson trade, get suspended for the whole season for gambling. And by the way, if you read a little bit more into that story, it sounds like he is a gambling addict, and probably at this point, I don't see how Denver doesn't just cut him. Like, it wasn't just a one bet on some kind of a random whim where he just wasn't thinking straight. No, this guy was gambling on Broncos games like every single week. So it wouldn't surprise me if they just cut him at this point because it's a very much uphill battle for him to even get back in the NFL at this point. And they've also lost two key players to season-ending injuries in Tim Patrick, who I think is still their best receiver, and Josey Jewell, who was projected to be an important linebacker for them. So Denver's season is off to a rough start already. It's already kind of looking like the season from hell. And I know they had the season from hell last year, but that doesn't guarantee they're not going to this year. So they're not off to a great start. And the Saints, I know they got a better quarterback, but I don't think he's that much better than what they had last year. Andy Dalton actually played well last year. Saints still couldn't win games because their head coach is kind of a goofball. Dennis Allen, great defensive coordinator, has a bright future in this league, but doesn't seem like the head coaching thing is really for him. And you put it all together with a roster that doesn't really knock my socks off. Like, who knows what Kamara is going to do this year? Who knows what Michael Thomas is going to do this year? You put it all together, and it's not a stretch to say both those teams have a chance to be kind of bad. But again, we need both teams to be bad for it to affect the pick in a positive way for us. And it could be a situation where both teams are bad, and then one team just wins 3 straight games at the end of the year in relative garbage time and ruins the pick. It's just, again, it's not worth twisting yourself into knots about. But that is how this pick works. Just wanted to go ahead and lay it all out there and explain it. See you guys later. Go Hawks. Let me know what you think.